Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
The Word docs acknowledge that we are meeting today on the lands of the Kaurna people, and we recognise elders past and present. These lands have never been ceded.
Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Welcome to Word Docs. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Matthews, and I'm here today with Dr. Alex Vickery-Howe.
Hello.
And Dr. Sean Williams.
Hello. Alex is being so naughty. We've had
He's
to
had
really
a lot
control
of
him.
coffee.
Oh.
There's coffee.
It's coffee.
There's being trapped in a room with us.
Yeah.
There's
all
been
the things.
gold-encrusted chocolate.
Gold.
Which I think
Think
It
of the
has
decadence of that.
salty gold.
Gold-encrusted,
Salty.
salty chocolate.
Salty gold Irish chocolate.
Oh, it sounds like a euphemism of some kind.
It's
I'm
not.
Everything we say, you're taking as a euphemism.
Yeah, we're at that point of the day, people.
We're at that
anyway,
point of the semester, in fact.
Are you
Yeah.
ready for a euphemism? 'Cause
Yes.
today's topic is beat sheets.
That's a bit naughty.
Good grief, Amy, that's a bit blue.
Blue.
Alex is obsessed with this term.
I
It's a
haven't
bit
heard
blue.
it for so long, and when you came out with it the
Bit
other day, I
old-fashioned,
thought there's
wasn't it?
something that's a bit blue. I like it.
Please
Anyway.
tell us what a beat sheet is,
All
Amy.
right, so we've kind of been talking a little bit about structure on and off between us, and this is a way to structure your plot. So some people will use it for first draft, for brainstorming, others will use it for second or third draft, and it really emerges from screenwriting. So I'm sure Alex has seen this a bit.
I've seen different kinds, so I'm curious as to what specifically you do.
Yep. So I don't always do this, but I'm interested in this, and I'm interested in it really, when your plot goes off the rails or you're on a second draft. I've just actually done a draft that was quite hard. Like I wrote a really complicated book that had 3 different main characters and it goes back and forth in time.
Ooh.
So there's like an A plot that is linear and then it cuts back and forth. So there's scenes in the 60s, the 70s, the 90s, like recent history. It like jumps all over. So it was really complicated structure. And so then I went to like a South Australian romance authors session where people were talking about beat sheets. And I was like, let's have a look at this. And I found it quite helpful. So I thought I'd talk about it today. So these all come from Jami Gold's website. So it's Jami, Jami Gold, Gold. So it's jamigold.com.
Are you sure their name's like Jam Gold?
Jami Gold.
Jammy Gold. Sounds like a brand.
Anyway, basically.
Sorry.
And then there's another one here from Elizabeth Davis. So lizwritesbooks.com. And they've broken down a number of quite famous story structure experts. So there's Larry Brooks, Blake Snyder, Michael Hauge, and then there's one for romance that Jami Gold's done for romance. And so which one do you want to do first?
So you've got all 4. We'll start
got-
with Jamie, shall we?
That's the romance one.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's start
You do
romantically.
Let's do Jammy Gold.
So I feel like she's kind of amalgamated a few different ones to do this, but basically all of them work in acts. So some of them call it part 1, some call it act. This one is act 1, act 2, act 3. Do you guys write in acts?
I do.
I do.
I do too. I think in acts, yes.
Yeah, I do
Yes.
too. And I liked I think it's Michael Hauge or maybe Deb Dixon. I can't remember. Someone talks about how act 1 is deciding to act and the act ends when the hero decides to act. Act 2 is the action and act 3 is the consequences. And I always quite liked that breakdown. But, so she talks about in romance, she breaks each act down into its beats. So act 1 has an opening image or hook.
Yeah.
So opening scene or sequence of story, creating empathy with characters by showing how they lack something. And then there's the inciting incident. So you'd recognise a lot of these from story structure, right?
Yeah.
So giving a glimpse of how right the characters could be for each other, but they're not ready yet. So this is for romance, obviously. And then you have the end
cannibals.
of the yeah, or cannibals.
Cannibals.
End of the beginning is the end of Act 1, and that's an external relationship arc. So what happens that forces the characters to spend time together? And an internal relationship arc, what decision do the characters make that reflects their desire for each other? So she's saying this is about 25% of the story. And it's really interesting because if you go through the others, they're different. So Larry Brooks has sort of Act 1 as 50% of the story often. And Michael Hauge has Act 1 as 25%.
But are they working from a 3-act structure, all of them, or are some of them working on a 2-act
No, all of them
structure?
3-act. So
Okay.
so Larry Brooks his first act is a lot bigger, but he has opening scene, hook, inciting incident, and first plot point,
Right.
which I thought was interesting. But the bit I'm really interested in is pinch points.
Mm.
That's what I got obsessed with when I was doing my rewrite.
Another euphemism. I can't even say it. How do you say it?
Euphemism?
Every
Yeah.
human being has pinch points.
Yeah. It's about finding the hook and the pinch. Yeah, well, I thought the idea of pinch points is actually really useful
Yes.
because when you're doing a redraft, you're often thinking those pinch points will be where you identify where your character needs to change. Like, what are the things you can do to them that force them to act?
They're points of no return, I
Yeah.
guess, which is why they're called pinch points.
Yeah, they actually, this one, the Blake Snyder one's interesting because he has opening image, theme, setup, catalyst, and then he says the debate is the point of no return. So there has to be a moment where the character kind of struggles with themselves. Any thoughts on this?
Interesting.
I've heard.
I'm going to pass them around so you guys can have a look.
Sure. I've heard in. Oh wow. I've heard
I just wanted to provide some foley
some
so we
foley,
could hear
so-
the
Foley.
So they
paper going
actually
around.
believe that we picked up a piece of paper. I've heard in Screen World another version of pinch points is like when the ball is hit with a racket and goes in a different direction. So if you look at
Like a
8-point
surprise.
arcs,
Oh, I
or,
see what you mean.
Like
Yeah.
they ricochet at a certain point, and you go, they can't go back to where they were. They have to kind of pivot now, which is kind of like a
I
pinch
kind of
point.
like the metaphor of it like a squash court.
Yeah,
You know how the ball can bounce off multiple surfaces.
especially when I'm playing.
Are we on
Sean doesn't
sports
even
again?
know what squash is at this
Squash,
point.
squash. Is that another euphemism?
Yeah.
Come on.
It's not a real sport. Doesn't exist.
But I
I actually used to play squash, just for the record.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're great at it.
No, I was terrible at it. I quite liked it.
I quite like it, but I'm not very good at it.
But I do like the idea of thinking about the beats as that hitting the ball moment that you have to kind of
Hoik it.
push it in a new direction.
They can't quite go back to where they were, so they've got to
Yeah.
move on from that point.
And the ball has no momentum on its own. You actually have to hit it.
It has to be action. There has to be agency. I'm stuck questioning why are the numbers even here?
Well, yeah, I
And-
don't think they have to be.
No.
Because I think you can do some of this stuff out of order as well.
Yes, it's really confusing, I think, because, I mean, some people will think, okay, well, I've got 25%. I've got 27%. It's not
But
going
I
to
think
work.
this is
And-
where it works more on film where you've got those tight budgets and time limits, you know, like theatre release time limits.
yeah, and
But
I,
even then.
I think a lot of this stuff in Filmland is probably about more than story too. It's probably about agreeing to things before we get too carried away. So often there's a lot of beat sheets or story arcs or whatever you want to call them to kind of go, let's all agree we're not going to spend more money than this. Let's agree we're going to this amount of locations. Now we'll actually start drafting it. So some of that negotiation work can
And it-
happen ideally before first
And again,
draft.
I think it's just a tool. Like you don't have to stick to any of it. Like
Yeah,
there
that's
is
right.
no rules to creativity. But I think the guide of the percentage is around pacing, right? Like you don't want to go 50 to 60% of the film or the book and no decision has been made or no action has been taken. So it's like making sure that the action is taken in the first quarter.
And I'm sure I've said this on the podcast before because I say it in class all the time, that exactly what you just said, Amy, that think of it as when your car breaks down, you bring out your RAA
manual.
manual or whatever.
Yeah.
That actually it's when things aren't working, you go, well, what have I done or not done?
Or when you have never driven a car before and don't really know what one is, to sort of think, okay, so there's an engine under there, and there's I think it's really helpful when you're starting out to think about how techs work.
Yeah, why they're working and why yours isn't working, which is what you said earlier, Amy. When your story isn't working, something like this
Yeah.
can really help you diagnose it. Well, there's been no decision in the first 30%, maybe. If I had one,
which
maybe
might
it'd work.
mean that you're starting it in the wrong place,
Yeah.
right?
And that's so
Yes.
common, isn't it?
Oh, it's
Or
the
finishing
most
in the
common.
wrong place too. That's
But I think also people don't know what their pinch points are often until they've written a draft.
Yes.
And then what your task is in the next draft is to make those pinch points really clear. Like this is a moment of, your character having their back against the wall and having to act.
And finding the right way to show that, I guess, because you don't want to say, I was up, my back was against the wall.
And I felt
knew
pinched.
I felt pinched on
I
my
felt
point.
like a squash ball on a sports wall.
Michael Hauge has this really interesting thing I may have talked about before, but it's very relevant to romance, is this idea that when you meet a character, you're seeing them in a kind of mask, in an identity, and that part of their journey is to get to their essence, to be able to be their real self, not their social performance. So his beat sheets are often about that. So he's got this whole thing that in Act 2, for example, there'll be a moment where the character seems to make progress and then retreats, like panics and retreats back to their old way of being. And I think you can see that. I'm just going to go to Star Wars because we always do. I think you see that with like Luke Skywalker, right? He's going to act and then he often panics and pulls back.
Yeah.
Han Solo does it too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, that resonates, I think. I think that would resonate strongly in rom-coms too, because that's kind of what I'm like in a real relationship.
Yeah,
Take a
that's
step
right.
forward and then maybe
Well,
not.
I think at the minute
Maybe
you're
not.
vulnerable, you panic a bit and you pull back.
The walls come back up
Or
again.
you get triggered. Has anyone watched The Bear? That is the best
Haven't
piece
seen
of
it yet,
writing I
no.
have ever seen.
Amanda, my wife, loves it.
Oh, season 2 I just finished, but it's just so well written and acted. But also it does these kind of, because it's a TV series, it's not in this very neat structure in the same way because it's a longer thing.
It's more
But
fractal.
yeah, the season I just watched, like Kami is vulnerable and he does seem to be moving forward, and then he completely gets triggered and retreats.
Yeah.
And it was such a good example of that, I thought.
Succession as well, particularly in season 4 when
Don't
it
tell
turns
me.
out they're
Don't
all
tell me.
robots.
Don't tell me.
Robots, they're always robots.
No, absolutely. I think, these moments where you think, we used to do this in acting school. We would do scenes, and it was the point at which one character tries and the other one puts the wall up, and then the other one
Absolutely, yeah.
tries and the other one puts the wall up, and they miss each other, because there's nothing more tragic than watching a relationship, any kind of relationship,
Which is real life, right?
yeah, where it can be a parental relationship, it can be anything, where you go, oh, I saw that one trying, and then that didn't work, but now that one's trying and that's not working. And a lot of our relationships, I think, can be like that,
Yeah.
where the offer isn't quite
Understood.
understood.
Or appreciated
Yeah. And I sometimes clock that in my own relationships where I go, oh, I think I just missed what that was, that moment
For
of
a year.
that moment of warmth I just missed. Yeah, exactly.
Lisa's the most patient woman in the world. Oh, can I just say.
But I was talking to my mother last night, and there was a moment where she said something lovely, and I kind of blanked it, and then I said something lovely, and she kind of blanked it, and I went, "Oh, we just did that. We just both
Yeah.
we both just kind of shot each other down when the other one was trying, and you don't sort of It's a very when that stuff works in a drama of any kind, it's really compulsive viewing, I think.
Yes.
And I think what I like about these is that they just give you a new angle to think about your story.
Yeah.
They give you a kind of angle you wouldn't necessarily come to on your own, which is what editors do too. But I like there's a bit in Michael Hauge where he talks about the major setback, like the final I think it's like the fourth turning point in his, but it's like the major setback. And he says the all is lost event causes a character to retreat, or it happens because the character retreated, which is what you were talking about there, right? Is if either it's caused by the character or it happens to the character. And that's worth thinking about, I think, when you get to your major setback, when you're editing, is like how much is driven by my character's interior journey and how much is an exterior event, because they're different stories, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And and that would be partially determined by genre, I would think. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Um,
So Sean, say
Yes,
you're
hello.
writing, I don't know, let's pick a couple of your genres. Which genre would you like to pick? Horror, sci-fi?
Horror sci-fi?
Horror sci-fi. Let's go with like Alien, horror sci-fi. What would be like a major setback in, or like The Thing is like one of your favourite films ever? What's like a major setback? What would be, if you're in the third act, sort of heading into the third act, what's the major setback there?
Depending on how you define a setback, it might be the moment you realise they think they've got rid of the thing, but there's the guy still in the hut outside.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they go to find him, and it turns out he's been the thing for a long time and
Yeah.
is building a spaceship, and everything falls to shit after that point.
So just when you think you've neutralised the threat, it's there and it's bigger and badder than ever.
Is that the kind of thing we're talking
Yeah,
about?
but I think there's probably what you're talking about there is there's an emotional moment where it's almost all too hard, right? I think Die Hard's a really good example of this.
Yeah.
It's just his sheer
Yeah,
exhaustion.
the moments where he kind of flops back against the wall and is just like, oh, you know, like I don't have shoes on and my feet are full of glass and now there's this other thing has happened. And it's those moments of limpness of like you've got to make a decision to just keep going.
Oh, Indiana Jones.
In-
is
yeah.
good at
Yeah,
that
he's good at
too.
that.
Harrison
Yeah.
Ford takes the punch well. Yeah.
Yeah, and flops.
Yeah.
Flops amazingly well. I'm just thinking of the latest film.
Yeah.
You've both seen it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that scene where he gives up
Yeah.
at the end and says,
Yeah.
"Okay, I'm going to die here."
Oh, yeah, this is the end.
This is-
yeah.
and in fact, it's a beautifully poignant moment because it would be a perfect place for him to die, but then he wouldn't get the resolution of his relationship and somehow getting off the hook for the murders that's never explained and all that kind of stuff. But it gives it a much more satisfying emotional ending, arguably.
I think you've got to see a hero. That's where, I mean, some action films just don't register for me because I'm like, this person's impervious to pain. And I want to see, you want to see some sense of taking the hits and it meaning something emotionally as well as physically.
That's why I think John Wick works so well.
Back to John Wick.
He's full of emotional pain. Physical pain he can take as much as he wants. But
And in the romance genre, Amy, is it a much more subtle thing?
No, it's usually dealing with psychological baggage.
Yeah.
Like it's usually a very personal journey of growing up, of like learning responsibility, learning how to manage your emotions. They're really stories of emotional maturity. So they're often around what triggers you, like what makes you put up walls or pull away or self-sabotage or push other people away and how to – so one of the things Jami Gold and I think Michael Hauge and some of the others say is what is the payoff, right? There's got to be a moment at which your character realizes there's something to be gained by pushing through,
Yeah.
by dealing with your triggers and actually growing up and not just falling back into old patterns.
Yeah.
God, this sounds like my emotional development in my late 30s. Do you ever think about your life in this way? I mean, are these useful sort of psychological tools? This is a bit of a segue into a whole different topic.
I probably do. But I think I read a lot of I gravitate towards novels that are about people in relationships. Like whether it's literary fiction or romance or sagas or whatever, or history. I love history texts about individuals. And I think that's me. I gravitate towards that idea of, maturity, like stories of maturity.
Yeah, and I definitely think science fiction and horror has that in it too, but with more monsters and
But with
spectacles.
more monsters and
Well,
more gore.
I think horror is so much about is grappling with mortality.
Yes.
Is so much about looking at the meaning of life it's an existential. They're existential texts, I think, horror.
Do you think that you sometimes play these things out in your own writing?
In what things?
The particular emotional triggers or experiences or journeys or discoveries?
I definitely do.
Like
Doesn't
our
everybody?
own personal ones?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I definitely do. Not always, but I think you can sort of see.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because romance is an idealized world. So the idea is it's aspirational. So they're often reaching maturity in a way real people don't. Like they don't backslide in quite. Not always. I mean, I think, but it's an idealized journey.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's probably not exactly true to life.
But it's explorational still too. It's a way of kind of rehearsing, just like reading books is a way of kind of rehearsing different scenarios and seeing how imaginary people get out of them or into them or through them. And I think writing is inevitably a little bit of the same. I mean, it's very different writing a book versus reading it, but I think there's a core element to it as well. We were thinking, if I was in this pinch point, what would I do?
I think they are texts that are my partner, Jono, wrote his thesis on it kind of being a like working with Edward Said and thinking about how these texts are kind of a post-theological world's way of grappling with kind of morals and meaning and all that kind of stuff. And I think it is true that that we learn from books, like in stories. We tell stories about. I mean that's what you guys have got a PhD student working on Joseph Campbell, but the hero's journey whole thing, or the psychological development to maturity, all those kind of ways we tell stories about how to cope.
And even in a theological world, that's what books were for.
Yeah.
So the function hasn't changed, and the delivery system hasn't changed much either, except one's presenting itself as fact and the other one's presenting itself as fiction. When in fact they're all fiction.
Yeah, a friend who's doing a PhD who's talking about the religiosity of storytelling or narrative, that we use it to give our lives, to defend ourselves against the randomness and chaos of the universe. We give our lives shape, which is sort of narrative, and that has its own kind of it's not a religion, but it has its own kind of
There's a good Ray Bradbury line that I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can tell you the gist. That's from Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is around that the very first humans sat around campfires telling stories to beat back the darkness.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah.
That sense of you've got to give meaning, particularly if you're an atheist, which I am.
I think we all are.
I don't want to speak for everyone. But
I think Sean has been vocal about that before.
Then you've got to have something. You don't have to have something, but narrative is a way of giving it meaning or giving a sense of.
But I think coping skills too, because Sean was talking about action or monsters or whatever, but we all have to face grief and failure and defeat and illness and hard things. And I hate the word resilience because it's kind of been co-opted by neoliberals, but resilience, like how to get psychological flexibility, how to have coping skills, how to strive for thriving, I guess.
Here's a good quote from Ray Bradbury about darkness. I haven't found the one you were referring to.
Darkness.
If we try to deny the darkness in our souls, then we'll become completely dark.
Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
Did you do your voice thing? Me.
Yes, but also I think what's wonderful about all of that is when you read someone else's work and go, I feel that way too, or when you're working on something and someone goes, yeah, I really get that. Because I think it's those moments of connection where you go, oh, thank goodness it's not just me who thinks these deep, dark, existential thoughts.
But I think these are, like, Sean, you were trying to move into these being like psychological reflection tools as well.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of being a writer, is how do you write about other people's fears? How do you decide what is success for this character? What is the point of change? What is a pinch point? What is the thing that will most challenge their worldview? Because I think often it's about, I know in romance, maturity, but it's about changing your worldview to be a more mature, compassionate. It's about developing theory of mind often, I think, with romance, about seeing another human and thinking, okay, they're behaving in these ways. Where does that come from? Yeah. Like being curious about the inner workings of other human beings and not just narcissistically self-focused. I've like stumped them. They've all gone silent.
No, that was a thoughtful.
I think it's true.
If I had a pipe, I would have been.
Well, I might left my pipe in my office.
Yeah, you have a pipe.
I do have a pipe for when I'm in Lisa's topic and I'm playing the Lighthouse Keeper. I have a pipe and a cap, There's a branch of
You
psychology.
need a cigar for when we do Freudian theory.
We should do an episode just on Freud. No, we won't do that. I promise, listener, we'll never do that. Isn't there a branch of psychology called narrativology or something like that, where you think about your life as a story and that helps you rewrite it?
Yeah, well, I know in trauma theory, like in dealing with post-traumatic stress, there's the ways you think about it. And the trick is not to retell the story of trauma over and over and over.
Yeah. So repositioning that or reframing, editing that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find that often when I'm in a complete mess, like because a lot of, like I've said before, I think a lot of my writing is quite intuitive and prelingual. And so then I often hit a point where I've got that first draft where I have to look at what I have and think about how to amp up the good bits and correct the bad bits and smooth the edges out. And for me, that's so much about character because most of my books are character-driven books.
And there are lots of different methods to do that. And I often think about Alison Goodman's method, which I might have mentioned here, but I'm not sure, where she works in reverse from the ending and says, well, what decision brought my character here?
That's interesting.
And they go back to the scene before and go, well, what decision brought my character here? So by the time she gets back to the beginning, she's got a complete...
So does she do that before she writes?
She does that before she writes, but then I think she uses that map or that mapping technique in drafts to make sure that it's working.
Because that's one thing romance gives you is you know the ending.
Yeah, that's right.
And then in the curiosity is how you get to that ending.
They kissed. And how do they get to the kiss?
I think it's more than a kiss these days, my friend.
They shook hands.
Good. They got in the
vigorously.
lake. The river. They got in the river. That's Amy's version. They got in the river and they
That
fooled
happens
around.
at about the 30% mark.
No, it's much later. You teased that for most of the book. Well, it felt that way.
Teasing
What point
the
was
river.
that? What point? So we're talking about marrying off Morgan McBride.
McBride. Yeah, well, I reckon that's the end. That's probably Act 2.
Mm.
And then he runs away, and then Act 3 would be in the cattle town.
I loved all that sequence in the Kettle Town.
That was my favourite bit.
Dear listener, if you haven't read Marrying Morgan McBride,
I haven't because my partner's reading it as we speak.
Well, it's fantastic. You'll learn
Not-
all
Well-
probably not as we speak.
For
but
my dear, Australian Commonwealth friends, it'll be out in Australia in the next year as well.
will it have a new cover? Is that part of that? Or-
No, I think the McBrides will have the same cover because the covers are just
Awesome.
amazing.
They are awesome. But I've just
Well,
I have
because
an
markets
obsession
are
with
different.
cover art.
Like Sean will tell you, they change covers because every market is different. It's not that the cover's bad because I think all covers are usually amazing because the professionals who do them are so good at them. But they usually change in Australia for romance for a long time. They had the big head girls, where they were it was a big head and then like a landscape. They are out of fashion now, I think.
Thank goodness.
But
Bring on the small-headed girl.
but US covers are usually very different. But for the
Yeah.
McBrides, those covers are just I don't think anyone could improve on those
great.
covers.
When we did the Japanese musical, it was a big mural by the Festival Theatre of like a Japanese manga, but drawn in Australia. And as soon as we took that to Japan, they went, nah. And they just wanted photos of the Australians.
Yeah, interesting.
So the covers of it looks like two different shows.
Well, someone else's bucket list has also been picked up by Simon & Schuster and will be out early 2024, like January, February. And
Same cover?
Very different cover. Very, very different cover.
What's on the cover? A bucket and
And a big head.
property of Bob with Bob crossed out and Steve written.
Yeah,
in.
it's much more rom-commy.
Oh,
It's
Oh,
not as
that's
serious.
a bold decision.
Yeah, it's not as
Wow.
serious. So it's
I love cover art. I'm a little bit
I do
obsessed with
too.
cover
I'm
art.
totally obsessed with covers. In fact, I bless our students because I was in a lecture sort of talking about the evolution of covers and how much I love looking at covers. And one of our students works in a secondhand bookstore, and he said they dropped off all these old bodice ripper romances. And they can't stock them. So he's like, would you like them? I'm like, yes, I would. Because if I have some of them, but our PhD students will snap those up.
Oh, yeah.
I love it when covers go wrong. I mean, professionals are fantastically brilliant and they know what they're doing, but every now and again they've got 6 hours to make a cover and they do the best they can and it doesn't work out and it's not their fault. It's quite fascinating in an industry full of people who know what they're doing when something goes.
Do you
horribly
have an
wrong.
example, or are you skirting around?
I have a friend who
I've
got a
very
bad cover.
I've got my second novel had a terrible cover. What was the story of your friend's?
Oh, it
bad
was
cover?
just it was wrong for the genre, and she
Yeah,
knew it. And
same.
she said, "Look, this is not speaking to a romance market. This is speaking like it doesn't look like a Regency romance. It looks like it's a fantasy book or something." And the book,
Right.
it didn't do well till she recovered it.
Wow.
There was a science fiction novel that came out in the late 90s that rather famously had a terrible cover. And it didn't start selling until one of the major independents in the States started wrapping it up in brown paper and saying the new book by blah,
Yeah.
the author's name, and it started flying off the shelves. But if the readers saw the cover, they just were repelled.
Yeah.
by it.
Fascinating.
It's so fascinating.
Don't judge a book by its cover,
The
but we
covers
do.
covers are really hard because you've got to get genre specificity, but also be wide enough to attract people who might be open to it, even if they're not necessarily looking for that genre.
I tell you who does great covers, and that's our PhD student, Izzy. She's self-publishing, got like 60 titles. I love her covers. I'm always
Does she do
distracted
them
in meetings.
herself, or-
I think she does.
I don't know if she does them herself or she
Right.
pays someone. I'm not
She
sure.
pays someone very good, but I'm always distracted in meetings because there's a backdrop of all her covers.
Oh, she does. She has a
Yeah,
collage of all her covers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Look up Elizabeth Duffield. Are they published under her?
it's Elizabeth Stevens, I think.
Yes.
I
Elizabeth
think she's
Stevens.
got a couple of different names, though.
Anyway, we're almost out of
I'm
time.
hosting. I forgot I was hosting. I was having so much fun talking covers.
We've passed the pinch
Anyway,
point. We've hit
past the
section
pinch
4,
point.
the resolution.
Yeah, we're up to
Final image.
the climax.
The protagonist summons the
done-
courage and
Yeah.
growth to come up with a solution.
Yeah, and then the aftermath will be, I guess, the outtakes.
The afterglow.
Thanks for joining me. I really do like talking these things because, like, you don't have to use them, but sometimes you get a breakthrough just thinking about it.
They're handy.
Yes.
I think they're handy.
I
They
really
never
like,
should be a rule, but they're handy.
Blake Snyder's got one here that I forgot to mention that I really like, which is the promise of the premise. Which
Yes.
is the heart of the story where you actually get to have fun. This is your John Wicks, like all your action scenes where you're actually having the fun bit you want to have in the story.
You've got to deliver on what you're promising. Or you don't, and maybe you promise not to deliver on what you promise. Then you become
We
very
make no
meta and
promises.
complicated. Take no prisoners.
Yeah, those covers make promises. Anyway, thanks for
Yes.
joining us. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Hopefully we've pinched all your points. And
We aim to please.
we'll see you next time. Happy writing.
Be right.
Happy writing. Happy pinching.
Why don't you write when you don't need money? All your notes sound alike too much. All of them start with I love you, honey, but they end with the same old touch. Just for a change, send a nice loving letter and cut out that please remit. Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
What are we doing now? Oh, that's right.
Beat sheets.
Oh, yeah, beat sheets.
Beat sheets just sound so wrong.
Yeah, you feel free to tell everyone that. It's fine.
won't.
We've
I
been
won't.
worse than that today.
I can't. Otherwise, we'll go down the rabbit hole again. The penis rabbit hole.
What's the expression? Blue. That's Amy's. It's a bit blue.
It's a
I
bit
love that
blue.
expression. It's a bit blue today. Amy says it
When?
on Word Docs.
I've said it once before, and Alex was like
I just
enchanted
love it.
by the term.
I just love the term
That's
blue.
a bit blue.
That's a bit blue.
When was this?
It's there.
Probably years ago.
Oh, I don't have no memory.
We've been around a while now. We're starting to
Episode
repeat
1.
ourselves.
Who are
we
you
certainly have. We have.
Who am I? Who are you?
I
What?
don't know.
Are we ready, everyone?
Yeah.
Me.
Ma 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 ma.
Oh, God.
That was so loud.
May.
What?
It's May. You
That's the
often
deep
do
one.
May.
It goes ma 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 may may. It's like me may. Isn't that how you do it?
Is this like an acting thing?
I think it's a thing that I might have just made up.
May.
May.
Moo.
Moo. Oh, okay. All right, everyone be quiet and I'll start the hosting.
Quiet, Alex. Shush, Alex. Shh.
Shh.
I'm often told off for my pinchy toes.
You're what?
I've got
What?
pinchy
Have you got
toes.
prehensile toes? Are you a
Yeah,
monkey?
I got
Alex?
monkey toes. It was taught to me by my father.
This is called
What?
the final injection of new information into the story.
Good grief. The season is now over, and now you tell us about your pinchy monkey toes that your
Yep.
dad trained you to use
Oh,
as
yes.
a weapon against
Yes,
your
I
girlfriend.
was once a Jedi Knight, the same as my father.
And this is our usual aftermath, everyone. It goes on for a while. Did you have monkey elbows as well, Alex?
What are monkey
Oh, I
elbows?
don't-
I don't know, but Sean might be into monkey
he
elbows.
would be into those, yeah. If you'd
Are you
asked
talking
me a
about
few
elbow
years
pits?
ago, would you have this conversation
No.
with colleagues?
No, with colleagues, with the New York Times bestseller, you're having these.
Number one New York Times. Thank you very much.
Talking about
Complete
what,
the surreality.
what really matters with a number one New York Times bestseller.
That's what we should call our next pub quiz, podcast.
Podcast pub quiz.
Podcast.
Jesus.
Oh, Sean.
Pubcast.
Pubcast.
God.
We should do a pubcast.
That's
Don't
where
we
we
have a
started.
live show coming out?
We do
Oh, I
have a
forgot.
live
When are
show
we doing
coming
that?
up.
Oh, I'm keen.
Is that part of this season or is it a one shot?
Well, we could release it as a special bonus Afterglow episode.
Afterglow.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes. That's a bit blue.
It's post blue.
Post
pastel.
blue. Jesus. Oh, I'm still
It's a
recording.
watercolour.
I'm going to stop recording now. Stop being funny.
Yeah, stop being funny, Alex, now.
Stop it.
Oh, he's dying of funny.
Stop it. Stop saying penis.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.